He wasn't supposed to stop. Not here, not tonight, not for something the world had already decided wasn't worth saving. The road stretched quiet under a pale streetlight, somewhere off a forgotten service exit just outside the city limits, where the air smelled faintly of wet asphalt and rust, and the wind carried the low hum of distant traffic like a memory that didn't belong. Ethan Cole kept walking, boots steady, shoulders squared, the rhythm of a man trained to move forward no matter what was left behind him. 12 years as a Navy SEAL had taught him that hesitation could cost lives, that instinct mattered more than emotion, and that sometimes the hardest thing wasn't pulling the trigger, it was knowing when not to turn around. He had seen enough suffering to recognize it without looking, enough loss to keep his eyes fixed ahead. But then came the sound. Soft. Almost nothing. A thin, fragile whimper that barely cut through the night air. It wasn't loud enough to demand attention, only enough to exist, like something holding on by a thread. Ethan's jaw tightened. He slowed, just for a second, then kept moving. The world was full of sounds like that. You couldn't answer all of them. You weren't supposed to. That was the rule. That was how you survived. But something followed him. Not footsteps. Not a voice. A feeling. The kind that pressed against your back, quiet but persistent, like eyes you couldn't see but knew were there. He exhaled slowly, breath visible in the cooling air, and stopped. For a long moment, he didn't turn, didn't move, just stood there, caught between instinct and something deeper, something older than training. Then, against everything he had taught himself, Ethan looked over his shoulder. At first, there was nothing, just shadow and broken light, a stretch of ground littered with scraps and silence. And then he saw her, curled near the edge of a dented metal container, barely more than a shape against the dark, a German shepherd with fur dulled by dirt and time, her body drawn tight around something small, something that shifted faintly beneath her ribs. Puppies. His chest rose, then stilled. She didn't bark, didn't move, only lifted her head slightly, just enough for her eyes to catch the light. And that was it. No sound, no plea, just a look. Tired, steady, unbroken, in a way that didn't make sense for something the world had already discarded. Ethan felt it land somewhere deep, somewhere he hadn't let anything reach in a long time. He should have walked away. Every instinct said to keep going, to let the night swallow what it always swallowed. But those eyes didn't follow the rules. They didn't beg. They didn't break. They simply saw him. And in that quiet, impossible moment, Ethan Cole realized something he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't the one choosing whether to stop. He already had. The wind shifted, colder now, threading through the broken edges of the lot, and carrying with it the faint scent of damp cardboard, and something older, something that had been left too long without care. Ethan took a slow step back toward her, then another, his boots quieter this time, as if the ground itself demanded respect. She did not flinch, did not retreat. Her body remained curled, protective, every line of her frame drawn around the small lives pressed against her, as though she had made a decision long before he arrived that nothing would take them from her, not hunger, not weather, not the slow forgetting of the world. He crouched a few feet away, careful, measured, the way he had learned to approach anything uncertain, anything that could break if handled wrong. Up close, he could see more. The faint outline of ribs beneath her coat, the rough patches where fur had thinned, the subtle tremor in her sides each time she breathed. And yet her eyes stayed steady on him, not pleading, not fearful, just aware, like she was weighing him the same way he was weighing her. Ethan swallowed, something tight forming in his chest that had nothing to do with the cold. He had seen that look before, in places far from here, in men who had held their ground with nothing left but will. It was not weakness. It was endurance. One of the small shapes beneath her shifted, a tiny movement, barely more than a ripple against her side, followed by a soft, uneven sound that barely reached his ears. Puppies. He counted them without thinking. 1, 2, 3, 4. All pressed close, searching for warmth, for something steady in a world that had given them none. Ethan exhaled slowly, his breath fogging the space between them. He reached into the pocket of his jacket, pulling out a small bottle of water he had not finished earlier. For a second, he hesitated. Then he twisted the cap and set it down on its side, nudging it gently across the ground toward her. The plastic made a faint scraping sound against the pavement, loud in the quiet. She watched it, then looked back at him. Seconds passed. Nothing moved. And then, carefully, slowly, she extended her neck, just enough to bring her nose to the edge of the bottle. She did not drink right away. She sniffed, paused, then took a small, cautious sip. Ethan felt something shift inside him, subtle but undeniable, like a door he had kept closed had just been nudged open without permission. He glanced around the lot, taking in the scattered debris, the lack of shelter, the way the wind moved unchecked through the space. This was not a place anything should be trying to survive in. And yet she had, not just for herself, but for them. He reached up and rubbed a hand over the back of his neck, eyes dropping for a moment as if searching for an answer that was not there. The rule had always been simple. Keep moving. Do not get attached. Do not carry what you cannot save. But the rule did not account for this. For a mother who had been left behind and still chose to stay. For eyes that did not ask for help but held their ground until it arrived. Ethan let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh, but without humor, and shook his head once. Yeah, he murmured under his breath, voice low, steady, more to himself than to her. I know. He shifted his weight, settling into the moment instead of resisting it, the tension in his shoulders easing just enough to feel something other than control. The night around them remained the same, the distant traffic, the flicker of the streetlight, the cold pressing in from every side. But something had changed. Not out there. In here. He did not move away this time. He stayed. The silence settled differently now, no longer empty but waiting, as if the night itself had paused to see what he would do next. Ethan shifted closer, inch by inch, slow enough that even the wind seemed louder than his movement, his hands open, visible. Nothing hidden, nothing forced. The dog watched him with that same quiet intensity, her body still curved protectively around her puppies, every muscle alert but not resisting, as though she understood something about him that had not yet reached his own mind. He stopped within arm's length, close enough to hear the faint rhythm of her breathing, uneven but steady, close enough to see the tiny rise and fall of the small bodies pressed against her. One of the puppies let out a weak sound, a soft, searching cry that faded almost as soon as it began, and the mother lowered her head instinctively, nudging the small form gently, guiding it back toward warmth. Ethan felt his chest tighten again, sharper this time, not from surprise but from recognition. He had seen that instinct before, the way someone holds on not because they are strong, but because letting go is not an option. He reached down slowly, pulling off his jacket, the fabric heavy with the warmth of his own body, and paused for just a second before placing it on the ground beside them. He did not push it toward her. He did not force the space. He simply offered it, the way you offer something you are not sure will be accepted. The cold air hit his arms immediately, biting, sharp, but he did not react. His focus stayed on her. For a long moment, nothing changed. Then, cautiously, she shifted her weight, just enough to stretch her neck toward the jacket, her nose brushing the fabric, testing it, reading it in a way only instinct allows. Ethan stayed perfectly still, barely breathing. Another second passed, then another, and slowly, with a movement so small it could have been missed, she adjusted her body, guiding the puppies closer to the edge of the jacket, not fully onto it, not yet, but closer, as if accepting the idea before the act. Ethan exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing just enough to let something else in, something quieter, something that felt almost like relief. He glanced at the puppies again, counting them once more without meaning to, checking for movement, for signs of strength, for anything that told him they were still fighting. One of them shifted slightly, its tiny paw pressing against the fabric, curling as if it had found something worth holding on to. Ethan felt that small movement like a signal, like a line thrown across a distance he had not realized he was standing on. He leaned back on his heels, running a hand slowly over his face, the rough scrape of his palm against his skin grounding him in the moment. "You are still here," he murmured quietly, the words barely more than breath, not directed at her alone, but at all of them, maybe even at himself. The dog's ears twitched at the sound, and for the first time, her gaze softened, just a fraction, just enough to shift from watchful to something else, something that carried a trace of trust. It was not complete. It was not certain, but it was there. Ethan nodded once, almost imperceptibly, as if acknowledging an agreement that had not been spoken. He looked around again, scanning the empty lot, the broken edges of the place, the way the night pressed in from every side, and then back at them. The decision was no longer forming. It had already settled. He just had to follow it through. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice even more, steady, calm, the way he had spoken in moments that required patience over force. "All right," he said softly. "We are not staying here." The words lingered in the cold air, quiet but certain, and for a moment nothing moved, as if the night itself needed time to accept what had just been decided. Ethan shifted forward slowly, lowering himself closer to the ground, his movements deliberate, controlled, the kind of calm that came from years of knowing that trust was never taken, only earned. The dog's eyes followed him, steady, unblinking, her body still wrapped protectively around her puppies. But there was no tension rising now, no warning in her posture, only a careful awareness, as if she was listening not to what he said, but to how he existed in the space around her. He reached out, stopping short of touching her, his hand hovering just above the worn fabric of his jacket, where one of the puppies lay half-curled, its small chest rising in shallow, determined breaths. The warmth from the jacket had already begun to gather there, faint but present, and he could see the smallest shift in the puppy's movement, a sign so subtle it might have gone unnoticed by anyone not looking for it. Ethan let out a slow breath, grounding himself in that tiny victory, then glanced back at the mother. "Easy," he murmured, voice low, steady, carrying no urgency, only reassurance. She did not pull away. Instead, her head lowered slightly, her nose brushing one of the puppies as if confirming what he already understood, that every movement mattered, that nothing here could be rushed. Ethan nodded once, almost unconsciously, and adjusted his position, angling himself closer to the edge of the jacket. He slid his hands beneath the smallest puppy first, careful, patient, lifting just enough to support its weight without disturbing the others. The puppy barely reacted, its body light, fragile, but warm enough to remind him it was still fighting. He brought it closer to the center of the jacket, tucking the fabric gently around it, creating a pocket of heat that the night could not easily reach. The mother watched every movement, her eyes never leaving his hands, but there was no resistance, only a quiet vigilance that felt less like defense and more like permission being considered in real time. Ethan repeated the motion with the next puppy, then the next, each one placed carefully, each one adjusted with the same steady precision, until all four were gathered together on the jacket, their small forms pressed into one another, the faint sounds of their breathing blending into a fragile rhythm that felt almost sacred in the stillness. The dog shifted then, slowly, her body uncurling just enough to reposition herself beside them, her head lowering to rest near the edge of the jacket, close enough to touch, not to take them back, but to remain with them. Ethan felt something settle deep in his chest at that moment, something that had nothing to do with the cold or the night or the place they were in. It was trust, not given fully, not yet, but offered in a way that could not be mistaken. He leaned back slightly, his hands resting on his knees, his eyes moving from the puppies to her and back again, taking in the entire picture, the fragile balance that now existed between them. The wind brushed through the lot again, softer this time, carrying with it the faint hum of a passing car somewhere beyond the darkness, a reminder that the world was still moving, still unaware of what was unfolding here. Ethan glanced toward the road, then back at them, the decision pressing forward, no longer something to consider, but something that demanded action. He reached for his phone with one hand, the screen lighting up briefly against the night, casting a pale glow across his fingers, but he hesitated before dialing, his eyes returning to the dog once more. "We are getting you out of here," he said quietly, the words steady, not a promise made lightly, but one that carried weight, one that meant something. The dog's ears flicked at the sound, and for the first time, her tail moved, just once, a small, tired motion against the ground, but enough to say she understood. Ethan nodded again, more firmly this time, and lifted the edge of the jacket slightly, testing the weight, gauging how to carry them without breaking the fragile warmth he had just created. The night remained cold, the ground unforgiving, the distance to safety still unknown, but none of that mattered in the way it had before, because now, he was no longer walking away. The fabric of the jacket tightened slightly in Ethan's hands as he adjusted his grip, careful not to disturb the fragile cluster of warmth he had just created, his movements slow and deliberate, every instinct focused on preserving what little stability the puppies had found. He shifted to one knee, testing his balance, the cold pavement pressing through his jeans, grounding him in the reality of the moment. The mother dog rose just enough to reposition herself beside him, not in the way of someone resisting, but in the way of someone refusing to be left behind. Her body trembled faintly as she stood, exhaustion evident in every line of her frame, yet she did not hesitate. She stayed close, her head angled toward the jacket, her presence steady, watchful, as if the distance between them now carried a meaning neither of them needed to question. Ethan glanced at her, meeting her eyes again, and gave a small nod, a silent acknowledgement that she was part of this, that whatever came next would not separate them. He stood carefully, lifting the jacket higher, cradling it against his chest, feeling the faint movement of the puppies through the fabric, their warmth barely enough to push back against the cold night air. The weight was light, almost nothing, but the responsibility pressed heavier than anything he had carried in a long time. He turned toward the road, scanning the dim stretch of asphalt, calculating distance, time, options, the way he always did, but this time there was something different beneath the calculation, something quieter, something that did not come from training. He took his first step, slow and steady, and the dog followed immediately, her paws silent against the ground, her body staying just behind his leg, close enough to remain connected, far enough to let him lead. They moved together like that, an unspoken rhythm forming between them, each step measured, each movement deliberate, as if the night had narrowed to this one path forward. The wind picked up again, brushing against his arms, cutting through the thin layer of his shirt, but he barely noticed. His focus stayed on the jacket, on the faint rise and fall within it, on the small, uneven breaths that reminded him that every second mattered. One of the puppies shifted slightly, a tiny movement against his chest, and he adjusted his hold instinctively, tightening the fabric just enough to keep them secure without restricting them. "I have got you," he murmured quietly, the words low, steady, more instinct than thought. The dog's ears flicked at the sound, and she moved a fraction closer, her shoulder nearly brushing his leg, her presence a constant, grounding weight at his side. The road ahead stretched dimly under a flickering streetlight, and beyond it, the faint outline of a gas station sign glowed in the distance, a small, steady beacon against the dark. Ethan fixed his eyes on it, setting it as his first point, his first destination, the place where he could find light, warmth, and maybe help. Each step closed the distance slowly, the minutes stretching longer than they should have, the quiet of the night amplifying every sound, every breath, every shift of fabric. He could hear his own heartbeat now, steady but heavier, matching the rhythm of his stride. The dog kept pace without faltering, though her breathing grew more pronounced, a soft, uneven sound that carried just enough strain to remind him how close she was to her limit. He glanced down at her briefly, noting the slight dip in her steps, the way her head lowered for just a second before lifting again, determination overriding fatigue. Ethan slowed his pace slightly, adjusting without breaking. The forward motion, allowing her to stay with him without falling behind. "Easy," he said softly, not as a command, but as reassurance, the same tone he had used before, the same steady calm that had built the fragile trust between them. The gas station light grew brighter with each step, the hum of electricity faintly audible now, the promise of something more than cold and darkness just ahead. Ethan tightened his hold on the jacket once more, his jaw setting with quiet resolve. Whatever waited there, whatever came next, he would face it, because turning back was no longer an option. The hum of the gas station grew louder as they approached, a low mechanical sound that cut through the stillness of the night, steady and indifferent, like the world continuing on without noticing what had almost been lost just a few hundred yards behind them. The overhead lights flickered faintly, casting a pale yellow glow across the cracked concrete, illuminating dust, discarded wrappers, and the quiet emptiness of a place that had seen too many pass through without staying. Ethan stepped into that light slowly, his eyes adjusting, his grip tightening instinctively around the jacket as if the brightness itself might disturb the fragile life within it. The warmth here was minimal, but it was different from the open cold, enough to soften the edge of the air, enough to make the small breaths against his chest feel slightly stronger, slightly more certain. The dog followed him into the light, her pace faltering for just a moment as her eyes adjusted, then steadying again as she moved closer, her body nearly brushing his leg now, drawn not by fear, but by the quiet understanding that this place, for now, was safer than the one they had left behind. Ethan scanned the area quickly, instinct taking over again, noting the empty pumps, the darkened convenience store windows, the single vending machine humming near the wall, its faint glow offering the only sign of life. No cars, no people, just space and light and the quiet echo of his own footsteps. He moved toward the side of the building, away from the open lot, choosing a spot near the wall where the wind was less aggressive, where he could create something close to shelter, even if it was temporary. He knelt carefully, lowering the jacket onto the ground with slow, controlled movements, easing the weight from his arms without disturbing the small forms inside. The moment the fabric touched the concrete, the dog stepped forward, her nose immediately finding the edge, checking, confirming, her body lowering beside them once more, instinct taking over as she curled around the puppies, pulling them close, reclaiming her role without hesitation. Ethan watched her for a second, the quiet efficiency of her movement, the way she adjusted her body to shield them from the open side, the way her breathing steadied just slightly now that they were settled again. He reached for the vending machine next, digging into his pocket for loose change, the metallic clink echoing softly as he fed it into the slot, his eyes flicking back to her every few seconds, never fully turning away. A bottle of water dropped with a dull thud, followed by a small pack of crackers, the only things available at this hour, the only things he could offer for now. He crouched again beside her, opening the bottle first, pouring a small amount into the cap and sliding it gently toward her, the same careful motion as before, the same quiet patience. She watched his hand, then the water, then him, and after a brief pause, she leaned forward and drank, slower this time, more certain, as if the distance between caution and trust had shortened just enough to make the difference. Ethan nodded faintly, then opened the crackers, breaking them into small pieces, placing them near her without pushing, without expectation, letting her decide. She hesitated, then took one, chewing slowly, her movements deliberate, conserving energy, but accepting what was given. Ethan sat back on his heels, the tension in his body easing in small increments, his breath finally settling into something close to normal. He pulled his phone from his pocket again, the screen lighting up against the dim glow of the station, and this time he did not hesitate. He scrolled quickly, finding the number he needed, one he had not used in a while but never deleted, a contact that represented something outside of missions and orders, something grounded in care rather than survival. He pressed call, lifting the phone to his ear, his eyes never leaving the small circle of life in front of him. The line rang once, twice, then clicked. Ethan exhaled softly, his voice low but steady, as he spoke into the quiet night. "Hey," he said, glancing at the dog as she settled more firmly around her puppies, her eyes half-lidded but still aware, still present. "I need some help." The voice on the other end of the line was quiet at first, still half inside sleep, but it sharpened the moment Ethan spoke again, the tone of his words carrying something that did not need explanation. He kept his voice low, steady, describing only what mattered, a location just off the highway, a mother dog, for puppies, cold exposure, limited time. There was a pause, then a single answer, clear and immediate. "Stay there. I am coming." The line clicked off, leaving only the soft hum of the station and the steady rhythm of breathing beside him. Ethan lowered the phone slowly, slipping it back into his pocket, his eyes returning to the small circle of life on the ground. The dog had not moved far, her body curved tightly around the puppies, her head resting just above them. But her eyes were open, watching him, tracking every shift, every breath, as if she understood that something had changed again. He nodded slightly, more to himself than to her, then adjusted his position, sitting closer now, close enough that his presence formed a barrier against the open side of the space, blocking what little wind still found its way around the building. The concrete beneath him was cold, unyielding, But he stayed, one arm resting loosely across his knee, the other placed near the edge of the jacket, not touching, just there, steady, available. Minutes passed in that quiet, stretching longer than they should have, marked only by the distant passing of a single car and the faint flicker of the overhead light above them. One of the puppies stirred again, a soft, uneven motion that shifted the fabric slightly, and Ethan leaned forward instinctively, his eyes narrowing just enough to focus on the smallest details, the rise and fall of its chest, the tiny movement of its paws. "Stay with me," he murmured softly, the words slipping out without thought, the same tone he had used in moments that demanded patience, not force. The dog's ears flicked again, and this time she did not just watch him. She moved her head slightly closer, her nose brushing the edge of the jacket near his hand. A brief contact, light but intentional, as if confirming something that had already been decided between them. Ethan did not pull away. He let his hand rest where it was, letting the moment exist without interrupting it, the quiet trust settling deeper, stronger, no longer fragile in the same way it had been before. He exhaled slowly, the tension in his chest easing in small, steady increments, replaced by something that felt almost unfamiliar, something that did not come from training or discipline, but from simply being present. The sound of an engine in the distance broke the stillness, low at first, then growing closer, headlights cutting through the darkness beyond the pumps, sweeping across the lot in a slow arc of light. Ethan turned his head slightly, his body shifting just enough to stay between the approaching vehicle and the dog, not out of fear, but out of instinct, the same quiet protection that had guided every step he had taken since he stopped walking away. The vehicle pulled into the lot, tires crunching softly against gravel near the edge, then slowing as it approached the building. The engine idled for a moment before shutting off, leaving a brief, heavy silence in its wake. A door opened, then closed, the sound crisp in the night air, followed by measured footsteps moving toward them. Ethan remained where he was, steady, grounded, his eyes lifting just enough to meet the approaching figure while his hand stayed close to the jacket, close to the life he had chosen not to leave behind. The footsteps slowed as they reached the edge of the light, and a voice, calm and familiar, broke the quiet. "You found them," it said softly. Ethan nodded once, his gaze flicking back to the dog as she remained curled around her puppies, her eyes still open, still aware, but no longer alone in the dark. The figure stepped fully into the light, revealing a woman in her early 40s, her hair pulled back loosely, a worn jacket zipped halfway against the cold, and a calm steadiness in her posture that matched the tone of her voice. She carried a medium-sized canvas bag slung over one shoulder, its shape uneven with supplies shifting inside. Her eyes moved quickly, taking in the scene without panic, without hesitation, landing first on Ethan, then lowering to the dog and her puppies. She slowed, her steps as she approached, careful, deliberate, as if she understood that the space between them was still fragile, still built on something that could not be rushed. "Hey," she said softly, her voice dropping even lower as she crouched a few feet away, placing the bag gently on the ground. Ethan gave a small nod in return, his body still angled protectively toward the dog, his hand resting near the jacket, steady and present. "She has been holding them together," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that went beyond observation. The woman nodded once, her expression softening as she looked at the mother dog, really looked, the way someone trained to see past the surface always does. "And now we help her hold on a little longer," she replied, her tone calm, certain. She reached slowly into the bag, pulling out a folded thermal blanket, the metallic surface catching the overhead light in a soft, muted glow. She paused, letting the dog see it, letting her process the movement, then eased it forward inch by inch, her hand low, her posture non-threatening. The dog watched closely, her body tightening just slightly, not in resistance, but in awareness, her eyes flicking between the woman's hand and Ethan's face, as if searching for confirmation. Ethan met her gaze and gave a subtle nod, his voice low and steady. "It is okay," he murmured. The dog held still for a second longer, then shifted just enough to allow the blanket to be placed beneath and around the jacket, the added layer trapping what little warmth they had, building something stronger, something more stable. The puppies stirred faintly at the change, their small bodies pressing closer together, their breathing still uneven but present, still fighting. The woman worked with quiet efficiency, her movements practiced, each action measured and purposeful. She poured a small amount of electrolyte solution into a shallow cap and set it near the dog, offering it the same way Ethan had, without force, without expectation. The dog leaned forward after a moment, drinking slowly, her movements steadier now, as if the presence of two calm figures had shifted something inside her from survival alone to shared effort. Ethan watched the exchange, the way the woman mirrored his approach, the way the dog responded, and felt something settle deeper within him, something that felt less like urgency and more like direction. "We need to move them soon," the woman said quietly, glancing toward the vehicle, then back at the puppies. "I brought a crate and heat packs. We can keep them stable for the drive." Ethan nodded, already anticipating the transition, his mind aligning with the plan without resistance. "I will carry them," he said simply, his tone leaving no room for debate. The woman gave a small, understanding smile, then reached back into her bag, pulling out the crate, setting it down gently beside them, its interior lined with soft fabric and a low, steady warmth that rose faintly into the cold air. She opened the door slowly, leaving it there, waiting, not rushing the moment. Ethan leaned forward, his hands moving with the same care he had shown before, lifting one puppy at a time, transferring them from the jacket into the crate, each movement slow, deliberate, each placement adjusted to keep them close, to preserve the fragile rhythm of their breathing. The dog watched every second, her body tense but not intervening, her trust holding, fragile but real. When the last puppy was settled, she shifted closer to the crate, her nose pressing gently against the opening, checking, confirming, her presence never leaving them. The woman looked at Ethan, then back at the dog, her voice soft but certain. "She rides with them," she said. Ethan nodded immediately, no hesitation, no question. "Of course she does." The night remained quiet around them, but the stillness had changed. It was no longer empty. It was moving. The crate door closed with a soft, deliberate click, a sound so small it might have gone unnoticed anywhere else. But here it carried weight, like a line being drawn between what had been and what might still be saved. Ethan kept one hand resting lightly against the side of the crate, feeling the faint movement inside, the subtle shifting of small bodies adjusting to the new warmth, the new space, the fragile safety they had not known before this night. The mother dog stayed close, her body angled toward the opening, her nose brushing the edge as if memorizing every inch, every scent, every detail that told her they were still there, still within reach. The woman moved with quiet efficiency, lifting the crate carefully, guiding it toward the open back of her vehicle, where a layer of blankets and soft padding waited, already arranged, already prepared. Ethan followed without hesitation, his hand never leaving the crate until it was settled securely in place, his movements steady, controlled, as if anything less might disturb the balance they had fought to build. The dog hesitated for just a second at the edge of the vehicle, her eyes flicking between Ethan and the crate, the space unfamiliar, the decision not entirely her own. Ethan stepped back slightly, lowering himself just enough to meet her gaze, his voice low, calm, carrying the same quiet certainty that had guided her this far. "Go on," he murmured. She held his eyes for a moment longer, then turned, stepping up into the vehicle with a slow, careful motion, her body moving toward the crate, settling beside it, close enough to touch, her head lowering once more to rest near the opening, her presence immediate, unwavering. The woman closed the door gently, sealing the warmth inside, then moved to the driver's seat, the engine starting with a low, steady hum that seemed louder now, not because of the sound, but because of what it meant. Movement. Transition. A way forward. Ethan stepped back from the vehicle, his arms lowering to his sides, the absence of the jacket and its weight leaving him suddenly aware of the cold again, the night pressing in where purpose had filled the space before. He watched through the window as the dog adjusted her position, curling slightly around the crate, her body forming a barrier, her eyes still open, still alert, but no longer searching the darkness alone. One of the puppies shifted, a small movement barely visible through the layers of fabric, and Ethan felt something in his chest tighten, then ease, like a breath he had not realized he was holding finally being released. The woman rolled down the window partway, her voice soft but clear. "We will take it from here," she said. Ethan nodded once, his gaze lingering on the crate, then on the dog, then back again, committing the image to memory in a way he did not question. "She did most of the work," he replied quietly. The woman smiled faintly, glancing toward the dog. "They always do," she said. The engine idled for another second. Then the vehicle began to move, tires rolling slowly across the concrete, the headlights sweeping once more across the empty lot before turning toward the road. Ethan stood still, watching as the distance grew, as the glow of the taillights softened, then faded, leaving only the hum of the night behind. The gas station lights flickered overhead, the wind brushing past him again, unchanged, indifferent, as if nothing had happened here at all. But something had. Ethan exhaled slowly, his breath visible in the cooling air, his shoulders settling, not from exhaustion, but from something quieter, something deeper. He glanced down at his empty hands, then back toward the road, where the last trace of red light had disappeared into the dark. For a long moment, he did not move. Then, almost without thinking, he turned, stepping back toward the edge of the lot, toward the path he had been walking before, but not in the same way. The rhythm of his steps had changed, slower now, more deliberate, as if each one carried something unseen but steady. The night stretched out ahead of him, the same as before, quiet, vast, indifferent. And yet, somewhere beyond it, in the back of a moving vehicle, a small circle of warmth pressed against the cold, held together by something that had not existed just hours ago. Ethan did not look back again. He did not need to. Because some things, once seen, do not leave. They stay, quiet and certain, like a promise kept without words.